All right. Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year. This is actually Hatch's first webinar of the new year. Give you guys a minute to trickle in here. We are doing a TCPA countdown webinar, helping you to get ready for January 27th, which is when the new FCC ruling goes into effect. While you guys come in, just a quick little icebreaker question. In the chat, you should have a chat window to your right in the webinar window. And I'd love to just hear from you guys how familiar you are with this new ruling that's coming out at the end of January. On a scale of 1 to 3. So 1 meaning you have really no idea. 2, you're somewhat familiar. 3, you have a pretty good idea. It'll just help us get an idea of who the sentiment of the audience in this webinar and how we can cater what we're talking about. Got a lot of different people here. We've got Jim's at a 7. Jim, on a scale of 1 to 3. First of all, Jim, it's great to see you. Jim, I actually do know that you could actually put yourself at a 7 because you're very knowledgeable about this. You've asked me a few questions on it already. So we've got a mix here. We've got people that are 1s, 2s, 3s. Again, if you're just coming on here, before we get introduced, I'm just giving you guys a minute to just let us know how familiar you are with this new ruling. 1 being not very familiar at all, and 3 being very familiar. Looks like we got mainly 1s and 2s, which makes sense. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we have a really good webinar for you today. So I'm going to get us started. Keep putting it in the chat, though. Helps us to see. Again, how familiar are you with this new TCPA FCC ruling? 1 being not very familiar, 3 being very familiar. And without further ado, I'm going to get us started. So I'm going to just skip right to introductions here. My name is Kristen. I am the head of marketing at Hatch, and we have quite a big panel for you today. We've got 4 more people on the call, and I'm going to give them all a chance to introduce themselves. So yeah, why don't you, Matt, take it away, introduce yourself.
Hey, thanks, Kristen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Cox. I oversee our product enablement, as well as assisting with our account management teams in all things Hatch. But happy to be here, and you got a great group of knowledgeable people here to help us navigate these new rules.
Great to have you here, Matt. And we also have 2 mics on the call. So Mike G, mic number 1, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Hey, everyone. Thank you. I feel like I'm on the dating game. No, I'm Michael Gifford. I work here with Angie Leads, the corporate account manager. I handle all things Angie Hatch in terms of integrations. Also, your point of contact if you have questions, comments, concerns related to Angie Leads in the lead aggregation space. We want to make sure that we set you up for success. I've been here with the company for about 8 years or so.
Great. And the second mic?
Great. Thanks, Kristen. And thank you, everybody, for having me here today. So my name is Michael Peranto. I'm the GM of Financial Services here at Active Prospect. I've been in the financial services space for about 13 years. I've worked for many different companies, Cardinal Financial Company, Limited Partnership as the Director of Lead Marketing. I've worked for Fair Independent Mortgage Corporation, and I've also done consulting and implementation work on CRM and contact centers. Ruben, why don't you go ahead and take it away from here?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Ruben Ugarte. I'm the general manager here of home services here at Active Prospect. Want to thank Hatch and Angie for allowing us to participate on this webinar. Active Prospect, we're a lead management, compliance, and intelligent lead routing software. We work with some of the largest home service brands in the country, including Angie. We trusted Form and have partnered with Hatch and have an integration in our catalog. We're excited to be here, and I think it's so cool that we're able to get one of the top lead providers in the country in Angie, our platform lead management, and then an integration partner in Hatch, which is kind of like the full funnel of the marketing tech stack together to talk TCPA.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben. I'm equally as excited, and I'm going to give you guys a quick little run through of what we're going to go over today. So first off, we're going to just do a quick definition, a quick little overview of like what exactly this FCC ruling is. We're going to put it into plain English so that you can understand it. Then we're going to go over what Angie is doing to adjust. And then from there, what actions do you need to take, right? Like if you use Angie, what do you need to do? If you don't use Angie and you use other lead aggregators, what do you need to do? And then we'll talk also about kind of the greater impact of this FCC ruling and how you can adjust to the new landscape where there may be fewer leads available, there may be higher competition. And then we're gonna open it up to questions at the end. If you have questions throughout the webinar, do please post them in the chat. A few things on that. Number one is if you ask a question and you see it disappear, it's because I moved it to the Q&A tab. So don't worry, it's not gone. It's just in the Q&A tab so we can keep track of everything. We'll address those. Number two is we're not going to be able to answer every single question. We're going to answer them to the best of our ability. But as you guys know, I mean, this is compliance stuff. None of this is legal advice. We are helping you to know how to prepare and adjust and adapt. But you guys can probably all attest to the fact that there is a ton of information out there on this, and it all depends on who you talk to. So nothing in the whole situation is kind of evolving too. So we're going to do our best to answer your questions and give you the proper guidance. But at the end of the day, it really is important to make sure you are consulting your legal counsel. And then I think the last thing I want to say is somebody in the chat put it as 0 on a scale of 1 to 3 on how knowledgeable they are about this. And Mike, you are not alone. A lot of people are in the dark on this, so don't worry. We're going to answer your questions to the best of our ability. And yeah, so I'm going to switch it off of slides. I'm going to just put our faces. All right, so let me get started. Mike P., I think you'll be the best person for this. Can you give a rundown of exactly what this new TCPA/FCC ruling is?
Sure, absolutely, Kristen. And I noticed that you mentioned in the chat that there's some people who they put a 0 on here, and honestly, that's something that even in Active Prospect we encounter businesses and companies of all shapes and sizes that are either A, unaware of the TCPA, or B, unaware of this upcoming rule change that's hitting on January 27th. So to take a step back here from a historical perspective, if you've never heard of the TCPA, it's the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. It was passed around the 1990s. And really the spirit of the law is that, if a business is going to be calling and texting a consumer, that consumer must provide express written consent for that business to contact them. Violations of the TCPA can be anywhere between $500 to $15 per call or per text message. Now, this recent ruling from the FCC that takes place on January 27th this month is what's the FCC called closing the lead generation loophole. And really, there's a couple of critical components to this law. We're going to go over them at a high level here. So the first one is that customers now must provide one-to-one consent to be contacted by a business. So what does that mean? So today, if you are purchasing leads from different lead providers that are out there in the space, a consumer goes online, they see a landing page, they fill out the form, and at the bottom of that landing page, there's a disclosure, a legal disclosure. And in that disclosure, there's a hyperlink to a list of companies that customer is providing their consent to be contacted by. Come January 27th, the way that this rule is being interpreted is that the consumer must explicitly consent to each business that is going to contact them. So that can be interpreted as like if a customer is going online, they see a form that each business is listed like as checkboxes as an example, and the customer will check the box next to each business that they want to be contacted by. The second component of the rules, there is a record keeping requirement. So now if you are going to be calling or texting customers, you must have a record of that customer providing that consent to your organization to call them. Now at Active Prospect, we have our trusted form solution that is really, that is what's primarily used within the space. We know that Angie uses it on their different landing pages, and that's what you can use to help capture and store that consent within your various systems. This affects companies of all shapes and sizes. So the TCPA is not something that is limited to Enterprise level businesses, it could be a small business, 2 employees, 3 employees, medium or large size employees.
Great. Yeah. So I think the best way to sum it up is instead of one-to-many consent, it is now one-to-one.
Yep.
And like Mike said, this is primarily, it's to close the lead generator loophole. So I want to make a quick distinction here that if you are using your own website to generate leads, which many people on this call are, you are getting one-to-one consent as long as it's your company on that form, and then your company is reaching out to them.
Yep.
However, there are implications for if you are using a lead generator or a lead aggregator, which we're going to get to. So thank you, Mike, for that definition of the one-to-one consent and the record keeping requirement.
Yep.
On that note, I want to switch over to you, Mike G. Because this impacts mainly lead aggregators, or a big part of that. I know a lot of people on this call use Angie. It is one of the biggest lead aggregators out there. So I think it will be helpful. It would be helpful for you to kind of go through what you guys are doing to adjust, just to give people peace of mind that if they are using Angie, that they are staying compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kristen. And thanks, Mike Pronto, for laying it out in terms of a real succinct look at how these new laws and how these new rules impact lead buyers. So ultimately, at the end of the day, as Mike did mention, we have implemented a one-to-one checkbox treatment. I think, Kristen, I believe you have a slide that we can show our viewers. This is effectively how we are incorporating an additional landing page within our service request path. This is where we have a clear call to action right at the bottom, where we have that the consumer can request quotes from multiple pros. We have the one-to-one select box treatment, where the consumer is specifically, giving that consent to that individual pro or multiple individual pros if they so desire. And then we have the legal disclaimer at the bottom that allows pros to continue to reach out to those consumers via using automation systems, where Hatch comes into play.
Yeah. This is a great visual. So, just to reiterate, you guys, in the past, it would have said, you're providing your consent for Angie or any of its affiliates to reach out to you. And now they have to actually explicitly check these boxes. That's a great visual. Thank you for and also, guys, we have established on this call that Angie uses Active Prospect. So Angie is getting that documented one-to-one consent. Before I go into, I know you were going to talk quickly about masked leads. Before we go into that, Ruben or Matt Cox, do you guys have any comments or anything you want to chime in on at this point?
Yeah. I will say that obviously TCPA has been around for many, many years. I've been at Active Prospect for 6 years. Prior to that, I was a buyer at a very large solar company. Would buy 20,000 leads a month. TCPA has been around, and Mike, feel free to correct me here, but 2012. And for those who've been running call centers or doing marketing for that long, this is not something new. Having consent and documenting it and not calling people without their consent is a business practice that folks should abide by. The FCC and these changes, from a layman's terms, is to some degree trying to move back from the way that we've operated on the internet, where we just give our phone number one time and for the next decade they're calling you and they're emailing you. Nobody likes that. Here in the US, our privacy laws have been loose. And so these rulings and the ethos of them are trying to kind of take this step back. Folks have made it clear that we don't want robocalls. We don't want people to text message us. And ultimately, the ethos of this FCC ruling is to really support a better consumer experience, which all of us here on this call and hopefully those here in the audience can agree is a good thing. There are some caveats to it that I think probably are overreaching, and like any law and any ruling, you the consumer, you the audience, including us, can have our say. And so there's things that are changing and evolving, but ultimately clients still want to get calls from brands that they want to work with, whether it's a roofing company, a plumbing company, HVAC company, and ultimately brands like Angie and other lead providers that are in their space that are compliant are still going to be able to sell leads to those buyers. Everything in between, we're all still trying to figure that out. But I have a lot of faith, and I'm very optimistic about where we're going as an industry for lead generation and specifically in the home service space.
Yeah, for sure. And Matt C., I'm sure you kind of experienced this a little bit on the account management side. It's a little bit of it can be tough because you want to have consent. You want to make sure you're engaging as many of your customers as possible. But at the same time, like, it feels like a loss, right? Like, oh, maybe I can't reach as many customers. But at the end of the day, I'm sure you've witnessed customers just being happier overall because they're only reaching out to people that want to hear from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I just like to double down on what Ruben said, in that, it's really for the consumer and for the protection. And what this really kind of prevents is that one-to-many that you mentioned before, Kristen, and how, sometimes you put it in your information and next time you're getting people from different even industries that you were looking for, or, that reselling of leads. This law really kind of buckles that down or constrains that to really giving you the opportunity to do business with those individuals that you're asking to do business with. And so I think, for those of you on the call that are using, the services here with Angie and even with Hatch, you're going to have better quality leads, right? Because these are individuals that have requested that information. And so you have some opportunity there to drive a better experience through your outreach and get those responses that you're looking for, where in the past, they either already have found a contractor or you're the second, third, fourth in line. So again, to anticipate leads to be a little less, but them to be higher quality leads as well from that perspective.
Yeah, and I'll kind of second that. And I know, Mike, you're going to kind of go through the Angie one-to-one kind of path here, but and I'm curious, Kristen, if there was a way for us to gauge the audience. I know there's like 200 people here on the call, and whether or not they're marketers or compliance people or just owners, but ultimately, at the end of the day, when you're purchasing a lead or if you're generating a lead, you're spending marketing dollars, your goal is to get an eyeball or someone on the phone for your product. And that consent or that ability and those laws have finally had, there's focus on them now. I personally used to buy leads in the old call center days. And as a marketer, the best way to get more sales and more deals in the door was to call it more times. That era is gone. And the era of having massive call centers and just dialing people 30, 40, 50, 100 times, that's gone. Now we're in an era where you can use a technology like Hatch, or Angie, who is using filtering technology on the front end, where you can use our technology, and where you no longer have to be spraying, your outreach, where you can be sophisticated and concise and have an omni outreach approach that involves consent with text messaging, a phone cadence, email, even direct mail. And so I think as an industry, lead generation marketing, we are having to become more sophisticated. And with that comes compliance. Yep,
definitely. I'm going to move us along here. Mike G., one other thing that you wanted to bring up, in addition to the adjusted service path, was the masked lead method, I guess you could call it. Do you want to quickly touch on that too? Because I'm sure some customers have already experienced that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And this is in addition to everything else that's going on with the TCPA and FCC laws. Is that ultimately this changes how we are able to provide that consumer information to you, the pro, on the back end. So ultimately, the steps that have to be taken are that we are unfortunately no longer able to provide you with a direct phone number for that homeowner. This is part of the ruling, part of the laws. And sadly, it's going to make things maybe a little bit more frustrating initially, but we do have some great workarounds in place that we believe are going to be able to help combat this. This is no different from how any other gig economy app operates. Other operators like Airbnb or Uber have this exact same experience where you don't ultimately get the direct contact information for both parties in exchange.
Yep.
So we will be providing a masked phone number. It's part of the new laws, it's part of the new rules that every lead you will receive will have a blanketed phone number, essentially protecting that consumer and their true digits.
Yeah. And like Mike G said, this is no different than what's happening like with Uber. Other lead aggregators are already doing it. Those of you who are using the Yelp integration, that's what they do is they use masked numbers. And to clarify, you'll get a number. It'll be a temporary phone number, and it'll essentially expire after 30 days.
Okay, so
That does not mean that you can no longer contact that lead. It just means that you need to build into your process, like how to capture their actual contact information. And I know for us, at least on the Hatch side, our AI bots are doing that work. So if you are using Hatch AI, if you send out an automated message to a lead, it's to a masked number, Hatch AI can detect that, and then it is programmed to capture that contact's true phone number. And then that way you can reach out to them in the future.
Yep. There's nothing that says you cannot ask that individual for their direct contact information. We can no longer supply it to you directly.
Yep, exactly. And I want to just acknowledge here that we are getting a ton of questions, and I'm putting them all into Q&A. So we'll spend some time going through those at the end of the webinar.
And I just went ahead and shared my information unmasked. Yeah. Okay. And you guys everybody has my consent, right?
And you know what I'm also gonna do while you just did that, Ruben, is I'm putting in this is a blog post that kind of breaks down this FCC ruling, and then this next thing that I'm putting in the chat is, and we'll send this out. We're gonna do a written recap tomorrow that'll have these resources in it, but the first one is an FCC kind of like FAQ, and the second one is like basically your TCPA checklist for what you can do, what you can control on your end as a pro. All right, cool. So we've talked about what Angie is doing, and now I kind of want to move into the actions that you need to take as a pro. So Mike, do you want to walk us through some of those things that people should be covering?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I think that's helpful about my background was, I've ran large contact centers where I was purchasing anywhere between 2,000 and 2,500 records on a daily basis. And I worked with many different publishers and aggregators that are within the ecosystem. So, let's first talk about what you need to do when you're discussing this with your publishers, right? You may work with many, many different companies that sell you leads today, right? And you need to understand a couple of things about what they are doing to comply with this one-to-one consent rule change that's hitting on the 27th. So the first thing is you might want to get an understanding of when they're going to be making this change. So as Mike G pointed out, Angie's already made this change, and you're going to want to know when that change is going to be taking place if they haven't already started it already, because this can affect your metrics, the customer experience, your ROI, etc. Number two, you're going to want to make sure that you have technology in place to capture that one-to-one consent. So any one of your different providers that are out there, if they're not currently using a tool that shows that consumer going through the web form, providing that consent that shows your organization listed, you're going to want to make sure that they adopt that type of a technology. Number three, you might want to have some discussions about what does pricing look like in the future. Over time, as you guys go through this one-to-one consent change, just like Mike G mentioned, we do anticipate that the performance of these leads should get better. You should expect, if a consumer is checking a box next to your name and not other entities, they're going to expect you to be calling them. They're going to pick up your phone calls, answer your text messages, answer your emails. You should get a higher contact rate because of that, which downstream should lead to more installations with your various customers that are within your ecosystem. But there could be a situation when there might be fewer leads. You could talk with your publishers about other channels of leads that you could buy from them, and just be aware of that. Now, internally within your own database, you're going to want to understand which leads today are currently not capturing one-to-one consent. So as Kristen mentioned before, the leads that come through your general your own website for your company, those ones in your disclosures, you probably have your company listed. You want to review that, but you should be fine with those. It's really just the leads that you are purchasing from these third parties, right? You want to see, is that customer explicitly, can they see your company name? Are they choosing your company name today? And if not, you want to make sure to flag those leads that you do not have one-to-one consent on in your database to say, hey, I don't have one-to-one consent for these right now. Any future leads that come in that you have the one-to-one consent, you want to mark those appropriately in your database so you can properly filter either direction. We're going to cover a little bit more about what to do with some of the older leads in your database further down in the webinar. I know, Kristen, you had some things you want to talk about in regards to the landing page.
Yeah.
Real quick, Kristen, I know there's a flood of questions and kind of things. I'm going to be kind of answering them. Can people see the answers, or is that hidden?
I think they can. That's a great question. I know somebody said they couldn't see. If you guys can put in the chat whether you can see the questions in the Q&A section, and then
I can see them. Yeah, so I can see them, but I don't know if the audience can. I'm just
that's
curious.
what I mean. Is I don't know if they. I think they can.
Okay. I'm going to answer the ones that I can, always with a grain of salt, but it seems like there's a lot of great questions that are coming out.
Nobody can see. It is private. So
no, Kristen, just under each one that you move to Q&A, you have to publish it for the group.
Okay. Let's see.
And then Ruben, you can answer those directly by hitting the answer button.
How do I publish it? Do you know?
Under each of the questions in Q&A, you'll see little gray publish answer.
I can do that, Kristen, while you continue on. I can just publish, and then we can maybe collectively answer as we go along, because there's a lot of really great questions.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm going to take a second actually to go over what Mike P just talked about, because I know some of you are like, are my website forms compliant? So I'm going to share just a visual. I'm going to go back to the slides here. So this is kind of just a helpful, like, what can you do on your side to make sure you're being compliant? And this is kind of the general checklist that I recommend to people. And if you are a Hatch customer, you are set because you are 10DLC approved. 10DLC approval is basically like making sure you're being TCPA compliant. So this is the run through. First of all, you have to make sure you have an SMS terms and conditions page. Then you have to have an SMS privacy policy page. These can either be separate SMS, or you might have a general terms and conditions and you can create an SMS section, but you need to have those two pages that are ability to be linked to. And then the third thing is to make sure you have the proper consent on your website forms. And I'm going to show you a visual in a second on that. Then the other thing is to make sure your first text message in your campaigns follows the TCPA compliance of having your company name and an opt-out instruction. That is also covered. If you are a Hatch customer, that is covered. You cannot publish a campaign if it doesn't have those things in there. And then obviously, once you make sure you have those things set, you can then register for 10DLC and get it approved. Obviously, you can't actually send out your first text messages if you're not 10DLC approved, but this is just to simplify things for you. So just quickly, what does that look like? Here is a diagram. So this is what we're talking about with that consent verbiage in your form. And on the right, this is like a checklist of what that needs to include. So it's a lot of stuff, but I'm going to quickly break it down. So you have to have clear, conspicuous consent language. So by submitting, I give consent, or by clicking yes, or by responding yes, any sort of like whatever that action is, you are giving consent, and then you need to include your company name. So I'm authorizing blah, 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 and that is your one-to-one consent. As long as your company is reaching out from that form, then that's one-to-one consent. The consent part, though, does need to include this express written consent based on all of this information. They need to see this information and give the consent. So that also includes how you're going to reach them. So text, email, or call. For what purpose? It can be very brief. We suggest for our customers to say, to reach out about your project needs. That they may be automated. That frequency varies. Message and data rates apply. Consent is not a condition of purchase. That just means that giving your consent just is authorizing them to reach out to you. It's not saying that you are agreeing to buy anything from that company. And then you need to have a link to your SMS terms and SMS privacy policy. So that is why you have to have those things in place first. But this is what, when you submit your 10DLC registration, this is what they're going to look for. They're going to literally vet your business and go to your website and make sure that your forms have this verbiage. So if you are following these instructions, then you are good on your end for the one-to-one consent. And then obviously reaching out to your lead aggregators and making sure that they are being compliant will make sure that you're covered. And then this, of course, is the first text message. So this, again, is built into Hatch. But that is why in all of our campaign templates, you're going to see this thing where it has to include the company name and the instruction for opting out. One thing I will clarify is that it does have to be all caps. The opt-out instruction is basically, here's the word that you can type back if you want to opt out at any time. And that word needs to be in all caps. The customer does not have to respond in all caps, but you have to clearly give that word. All right, so I'm going to go back to our faces here, and we are going to move along here. Before I do you guys have any questions or comments or concerns, you guys on the webinar?
No, I would just comment that I think the main reason this is important for a lot of the smaller businesses is, well, one, if you're a massive enterprise business, you're worried about class actions and potentially the FCC or the government regulating your marketing practices, right? But for the majority of us, which are small businesses, the fear is that you don't have consent and that your marketing practices have a threat because there's all these potential litigators out there. So I don't know if we want to touch on that, but ultimately, and I'm sure a lot of brands here on this call, and we might even have some of you shitty litigators here on this call too. The fear is that litigation or professional litigators are going to chase your company down, fill out a form nefariously, wait for you to call them a bunch of times, and then come to you and say, hey, you called me a bunch of times, you owe me $100,000. And that is happening across America. There's tons of professional litigators that, in my opinion, have been preying on a lot of small businesses. And this ruling and what we're talking about and how you protect yourself is really to guard against that. And so I just wanted to highlight that. I know there's a lot of marketers out there and probably on this call who've gotten those legal letters. They're not fun. It's not a fun day when you get that, but it's part of the business and it's part of the environment that we live in today.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know that some people are asking if they can see a list of all the questions and answers. We'll do our best. I will have all the questions after this, and whatever we can answer, I will include that in the written recap. But yeah, Ruben, that's a great point. This really does apply to anybody. And there are people in the chat that are saying that they've already been hit with some of those things.
Yeah, and Kristen, Ruben, to your point, one of the things that you have to be cognizant of is that if you were to receive just a standard TCPA demand letter from an individual or even one of these known litigants that are out there, your ability to combat against these known litigators is a lot easier if you are working with partners like Angie who have compliant forms and you've got your forms buttoned up and you have a TCPA playback from Active Prospect using our trusted form certificate versus going into court with nothing to help you in your defense. And, and realistically, I know we've touched on this on multiple occasions. These rules that the FCC is writing, it's really just to benefit the consumer and to allow them to provide consent for your company to call them. It's a better experience for them. It's a better experience even for you and your employees. Your employees are going to be calling people that actually expect you to be calling them. They're going to see your caller ID. They're going to pick up that phone, and ultimately this will be good for all parties involved. And, you know, I would say as much as humanly possible, just try to do everything you can to capture that appropriate consent, follow the formatting that Kristen provided. Angie has a great flow that they go through to allow that consumer to provide the consent, and it's going to make your life a lot easier if you get into a TCPA lawsuit.
Yeah, and I'll also say that people are, as we said, really the only way you would get like caught is if, you know, somebody has a bad experience. Yes, litigators may do it on purpose, but somebody that gets like, it goes to show that you need to be intentional about your communications. If you're just sending these mass blasts out all the time and not really thinking about who you're targeting and not really tailoring your messaging, then chances are you may annoy somebody, and then somebody may, but like your average consumer isn't necessarily going to be on the lookout for like getting you into a TCPA lawsuit. So again, it just comes back to making sure that you are not just abusing your database, but actually looking for ways to cater to them.
That's exactly right, Kristen. And, you know, we're going to talk a little bit more, you know, about ways of basically recapturing consent here in a minute. But, you know, to your point, the old days of buying lists of leads and blast texting leads that are 3-4 years old or even a year old, those are gone. And honestly, it's a bad experience for the consumer. And if you make enough consumers mad, they're going to look for ways to reciprocate against your organization.
Yeah.
So you really want to be using more leads that you've acquired fairly recently to be calling and texting them anyways, because it's just a good representation of your brand to that consumer. And you have a less likelihood of pissing somebody off where they get to the point that they may see you as well.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So Mike P, you touched on it. There's two more things I want to cover, and then we can go more into the questions here. Sure. The first thing is I want to get back to the recapturing of consent, but before we do that, I want to quickly touch on what can you do, because there is going to be there are going to be fewer leads available, right? There's no question about that. So what do you do about that? And I want to just take a minute to talk about, I mean, obviously this is what we do at Hatch, but I want to just talk about, and I know Matt Cox, you can help me out here with this, just talking about making sure that you are reaching out to your leads, not just like, you know, in a speed to lead campaign, but across the customer journey to maximize that lifetime value. Do you want to start on that, Matt Cox, or do you want me to?
Go ahead. I can support you on it.
Okay, cool. So what I mean by that is, you know, we have customers that they a lot of them find Hatch because they want to find ways to reach out to their leads right away, and they don't necessarily know that we offer these other solutions like nurturing or estimate follow-up. So the best practice for when we set up somebody with a Hatch account is we set them up with a number of campaigns. So it's speed to lead, and then it's also estimate follow-up. So after you know, a tech goes into the home, and maybe they don't close in the home, they leave behind a few estimates. A lot of times the rep or the tech may reach out to the customer 2 days after just to be like, hey, how did it go? And sometimes the customer is like, oh, I never got a quote. Like there's some really low hanging fruit there. And then other times, yeah, it services objections, but that 2-day estimate follow-up is so key in keeping the customer engaged. And then maybe it's, you know, a month later estimate follow-up. And then maybe you have a campaign for, you know, 30 days has gone by and a lead that came in never set an appointment. Once they become a customer, you have a campaign that is, you know, welcoming them on board and telling them what to expect with their appointment. You're following up after the appointment. Maybe they become a member and you do membership campaigns. So these are just the idea here is that it's not just about converting your leads right off the bat. It's about nurturing them all the way through and then staying on top of them throughout the customer journey to maximize the lifetime value of that lead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just a couple of things in addition to that too, for some of our Hatch users out there, you know, if your leads are coming in through Angie or Active Prospect or any of those, you're in compliance, right? Because they have their consents, so on and so forth. But there's also a double protection for you that's always existed within Hatch. And that's the ability in all of our messaging that we require compliance statements that state, hey, reply, end, or stop to end this conversation, right? So if a customer replies that for whatever reason, maybe they found someone else or maybe they changed their mind, that removes them from any campaigns from within Hatch. So there's safety measures there to prevent that duplicate outreach or not honoring those requests. I think the big thing for this group is if a customer says stop or end, honor the request, right? Yeah. I know Mike P mentioned earlier, a lot of that comes through clean data within your data management system, CRM. I did see a question earlier. We do, with certain CMs, we do share that information back to the CRM, right? If there was an end or request to stop, so that you can have consistent information there. In addition, you can also look at different strategies, right? So if you're in communications with a customer and they're trying to do business, like it's okay to still talk to them, right? You can still call them from your call center. You can still follow up on that estimate. In addition, there's also a slightly different rules there for clients that actually do business with you, right? Say you have booked an appointment or you have secured a contract to do business, right? You have the ability there as a business to extend that communication past 30 days. I believe it's up to 18 months that you can still reach out to that customer, follow up with additional services, and there's campaign strategies that we have within Hatch to do so. And then lastly, if you want to go the extra route of protection, there's always the opportunity to run an opt-in campaign, right? You can always reach out to your customers and say, hey, you did business with us a long time ago. Would you still like to continue to receive messages from us? If they reply yes, that's your consent. And you can move forward. They have the opportunity to say end or stop. And if so, we'll honor that and move forward. So there are different, I guess, more unique strategies that you can think about when you're trying to outreach to your customers and just being maybe a little bit more polite and compliant at the same time. Yeah.
And that's a great segue, because that's what I was going to switch back to Mike P on, is doing a recapturing of consent. So I know that a lot of our customers like to do nurture campaigns. And so they're questioning, what about customers in my existing database? The answer to that is if your leads came in through your website, you have one-to-one consent. If you are not sure, the best thing you can do is run a campaign to recapture that consent. And ideally it's with something with an incentive. So I don't know if Mike, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually answers, there's a couple questions that I've seen about this, and we get this all the time on the Active Prospect webinars as well. So the way that the FCC rule is written, it actually applies to all leads, not just leads that are acquired after the January 27th date. So you are receiving leads today that currently from different lead providers that do not have one-to-one consent. And you're like, well, what can I do after January 27th if I don't have one-to-one consent? The answer is you cannot call and text those customers, right? So what do you need to do now to get that consent? So any of the records in your database that you are either currently marketing to, or they may be slightly aged, you actually have an opportunity right now to you can send a text message, you could call those customers, send an email to them, to have that customer click on a link and have them re-provide that consent to your organization, or have them provide that one-to-one consent for your organization to contact them. So that way, after the January 27th date, you have that one-to-one consent and you can continue to call them and text them through your nurture campaigns. Let's use email as an example. Let's say you've got a list of records that you received them within the last 90 days, 3 to 6 months. You can send an email to them en masse. There could be a button, and in that button, they click on it. It brings them to a landing page that's got their information pre-filled on it. It's got the appropriate disclosure language on it. It's got Active Prospects technology on that page. When they click on submit, that generates the certificate. So you then have that proof of consent and the one-to-one to consent for it.
Yeah. And I think, it is best if you can give them an incentive. So it's good. People actually they like that you're respecting their privacy. So even if you get a lot of people opting out, that's actually for the better, because you're only going to have people engaging with you that want to hear from you. Yeah. But it doesn't hurt to do it in the form of either a sweepstakes or a giveaway or a discount, sign up to receive this. Or it can blatantly be like, hey, do you want to stay in touch? But they do need to see that same verbiage. They need to re-give their consent.
Yep.
And I'll also add that we are building out a solution for this with Hatch AI. So especially when it comes to, like, Matt, you touched on like this 18-month rule. Like when you get their one-to-one consent, it word on the street, and by on the street I mean, like, I don't know, in the world of TCPA, is that consent only lasts for so long. So we're working on a solution where, when 18 months comes around the corner, your bot is just programmed to reach out and recapture that consent. And then that way you can continue marketing to them throughout their entire customer life cycle. All right. I think we covered all of it. I know, Ruben, you've been hard at work in the Q&A section over here.
Yeah.
So is there anything in there that you want to surface? Any of the questions? I mean, we can't answer all of them, obviously, but is there anything that sticks out?
I will just preface it by saying that I took a legal course in junior college 20 years ago, so I'm completely qualified to answer most of these questions on TCPA. Once again, grain of salt with everything that I'm sharing. I'm just trying to share knowledge. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal counsel. But I would just say that there's a lot of changes and there's a lot of continuation. If you don't understand a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, you're winning by being here. I think the first step in compliance and being a marketer and trying to understand the evolving rules is getting in the know. And if you're on this webinar for the first time, it's the first time that you've engaged in trying to understand what TCPA is and how to protect your brand. That's a good thing. There's a lot of resources out there. We've conducted an FCC webinar series that's been super helpful that I'll kind of post in here. I know Hatch has a lot of literature. Obviously, Angie's contributing here. Just continue to evolve. There's, obviously lead generation conferences, and there's all types of webinars. There's a lot going on, and I just want to encourage everybody who's here on the call to continue to delve in, try to understand. And if you're on this call, you're kind of taking a step forward. So I know it can be discouraging hearing a lot of information where you're like, oh, what does that mean? Or like, and I can tell from some of the questions, there's just more and more questions that come around, yeah. But continue to listen in.
Yeah. And I'll say I've seen a few in here that are like, what if somebody calls me, or what about mailing? And like, if they call you, that's okay. You're not reaching out to them. They're reaching out to you. So that's okay. When it comes to like mailing and things like that, this is the TCPA. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike P, but the TCPA stuff, this is for A to P messaging. So that's application to app to person, I believe. So this applies if you are using a tool like an app to do texting and calling on a large scale. Am I correct?
Yeah, so I could just provide just some clarity for this. So first of all, the TCPA is for phone calls and text messages. It does not apply to email or mailers. So at any point in time, you do have I know there is the Can Spam Act for email, but the TCPA does not apply to anything related to email or mailing. You can use those channels if you want to. That does not apply to it. We do get this question fairly often. And basically the TCPA is really, the spirit of it is to block automated technologies from calling and texting consumers, robo-dials, robo-texting, whatever that may be, or tools. There are applications that are used as well that are covered under the TCPA. There is many, many different interpretations of it. And the safest way to protect your company from a TCPA complaint is to always capture consent, is to always have the appropriate disclosure language and capture and store that consent. That's going to make your life immensely easier if you were to receive any sort of TCPA complaint in court.
Yep. Somebody in here asked how Hatch plans to combat the one-to-one consent with the basic bot. Kyle, we are working on bots. We have not yet enabled templates for basic bot, but once we do, that's going to be built into it. So whether that's like including in the conversation script to verify that you want to get their, this is built into every bot regardless, is like it still asks, you can either have the bot ask for that person's contact information or they search for it and confirm it. So if it's a masked number, for example, the person will confirm like, no, that's not my correct number. This is my correct number. And then as far as the 18-month, I know somebody asked, did I just hear that the consent expires after 18 months? There's no definite there. That 18-month has been kicked around quite a bit. And I'll let you speak to this on the active prospect side. I don't know what you guys have heard, but if it is a thing, then that is another thing. That's another bot that's the other bot template that we're working on is recapturing that consent.
Yeah, I can speak on that briefly. So what you're mentioning is called the existing business relationship component of the TCPA. There are many different interpretations of this. Some of them say that the consent expires after 90 days. Some interpretations are 180 days to a year. It really just depends on what your compliance department's interpretation of it is.
Yep. And I want to touch again, I know a lot of people are asking, what about the people that are already in our CRM system? Like I said before, if you're capturing leads through your website, then you're okay. It may be difficult for you to single out in your CRM who has one-to-one consent and who doesn't. So the best way to do that is segment out your audiences anyway with your campaigns. This is, like I said, going back to the funnel, like specific people that you've had an estimate with, specific people that have had this or that. That way you can have tailored messaging that people want to receive. And that should shrink your audiences down per campaign. And then from there, you can decide, okay, like, is the majority of these customers, are they from my website leads? And then I have the one-to-one consent. If you're not sure, then do a consent campaign. Yeah,
absolutely. And Kristen, to your point, like the existing customers from the website, that's almost always a slam dunk when it comes to one-to-one consent. It's really if you are purchasing leads from different vendors, and then it's really just talking to the vendor. If you have questions of like, hey, were these leads that I bought in the past, did they provide one-to-one consent to my organization? All of the known publishers in the space know what this ruling is, and they know what their previous advertisements and landing pages were like. So you can simply just ask them. It can be an email away, and they can provide you with some clarity on that subject. And then from there, once you get your answer, it's just saying, okay, these leads I do, these leads I don't, and then running the reconsent campaign on the ones that you don't.
Yep, absolutely. Let's see, I'm just kind of going through any of these questions. You guys on the webinar, feel free to surface any questions you want to call out.
Yeah, so there was a question related to checkboxes being pre-checked or not. So this is a question that is we get this question a lot on the active prospect webinars as well. If a consumer goes to a form from a publisher or from one of your lead providers and that they've got pre-checked checkboxes, is that compliant or not? There are different interpretations of this. There's actually no concrete answer either direction. We've seen about a 50-50 split amongst the different publishers in the ecosystem for having pre-checked checkboxes or unchecked checkboxes. If you are concerned about that, ask your publisher. Ask them how their form is designed. Have them show you. They've got mock-ups. Andy's already showing you this here. They're already running it. Ask them what they is. And then from there, just make the determination. Are you comfortable with the pre-check checkbox next to your company name or not?
Yep. Another thing I want to add in here, and this is sort of what Ruben alluded to earlier, is like TCPA stuff has been around since like 2013, if not earlier. And the truth is, like, probably nobody is 100% compliant. Like, the laws are always changing, the rules, like, nobody can really necessarily say like we are following exactly every rule, because it's all evolving. So the goal is to be as compliant as possible. And like Ruben said, being on this webinar and just being mindful of it, that's already 7 steps ahead of somebody who is just like, oh, I don't care. Yeah. Like, the world's not going to end on January 27th. You're not going to see these like, drastic changes in things. But again, this just comes down to like, use your gut and think about the campaigns that you're building. And if you're like, I don't necessarily know that a customer would want this campaign. Like, are you treating them well? Are you
Yep.
catering to them rather than just, blasting your emails?
And I'll second that. Nobody's on the, I mean, maybe some, but historically as marketers, your goal isn't to follow every single rule. The goal is to spend marketing dollars to bring in revenue for your brand. And historically, the goal is to be as compliant as you possibly can be while still throttling your revenue, still throttling your lead gen. Obviously, folks who have call centers, you need leads in order to keep those call center seats filled. And so historically, the goal is to be as compliant as you possibly can while still maintaining that sales velocity and increasing the revenue for your brand in whatever category it is that you are servicing. I've never met a brand, even the biggest brands in the country, that are 100% compliant. The goal is to be as compliant as you possibly can. Things are always evolving. And even when you're ultimately compliant, there's always still issues. And so I think this is a subject that has finally come around where, I remember 5, 6, 7 years ago, I'd talk about TCPA and be like, what is that? What are you talking about? I'm compliant. Yeah. I ask the people if they want a roof on the call when I call them. And so, once again, as an industry, we're evolving. As marketers, we're having to be more understanding and knowledgeable about TCPA, FCC requirements, legalities. And I think that's a good thing. I think, along with our creativity and our performance marketing ability, the ability to understand the legalities that go around it, and to be able to go to your CFO, your leadership team and say, hey, I know we're spending millions of dollars and we're calling a bunch of phone numbers, but hey, here's our plan. And this is kind of how we've layered compliance at different stages of our lead intake, our dialer, our CRM, and so on.
Yeah. And if you're a Hatch user, that doesn't mean you need to stop any of the campaigns that you're currently running. This is definitely a moving forward thing. Again, we'll say that if you want to run an opt-in campaign, you can. That's what Hatch allows you to do, is you can set up a cadence for whatever purpose you want. But again, you're here, you're mindful of it, and that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and Kristen, there was a couple of comments as well from the audience in regards to resources on this rule. So obviously, Active Prospect, we've got our webinar series, as Ruben mentioned. You can sign up; it's free. We also have our recordings on the website where we have various webinars where we discuss the FCC ruling. We have attorneys that come on, Q&A, etc. But also, if you go online and you just Google the FCC lead generation loophole, or FCC closes the lead generation loophole, there's plenty of articles on there that explains this. The FCC did post this rule online, so you can actually go to the FCC website, see the content of the rule. Honestly, if you are not a lawyer, reading the rules is going to be very difficult for you. It's probably better to, at least in the beginning, first go to some of these different resources that are available online. And then if you have questions or clarifications, absolutely seek legal advice, right? If you are that concerned about it, go seek legal advice. But there are a lot of good resources online on this particular subject because of how broad it is and how it affects both lead buyers as well as lead providers.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll reiterate that we are about an hour after this webinar ends, you will get the recording, and maybe even sooner than that. It'll just be the full replay. And then we're going to do a written recap where we'll kind of condense everything into a nice digestible written format for you. It'll also have another link to the recording. And I will go through these questions. Ruben, thank you so much. You answered a ton of them in the Q&A section. So we'll include that transcript so you guys can get the answers that you're looking for.
Yeah, I tried my best possible to kind of, give information out. And I just want to thank yourself, Kristen, for organizing us, and Mike from Angie, and Matt and Mike, my teammate. You're such a knowledgeable around this subject. And I think we'll probably continue to have more, webinars and work with partners like Angie and Hatch on things like this. If you're a contractor, please reach out to us. Active Prospect, Trusted Forum's been around for, I think, 14 years. It's kind of finally, and it's a product that's finally coming to the forefront, with the tension on compliance. At Active Prospect, we have about 225 home service brands, some of the largest in the country, including Leaf Home, West Shore, Terminix, ADT, and others. We're here to help. We don't have all the answers, but we certainly have a network of professionals and partners who we tap into, and we're here to help and support all home service installers and brands through this transition in 2025.
Great. And one last thing is the poll was launched, but I'll just verbally state it that there's a poll up that if you want to learn more, if you're not a Hatch or Angie or Active Prospect customer, you have the option to raise your hand, your digital hand. And if you choose any of those, one of us will reach out to you, or you can choose option D and you want all three. So I'll leave the poll up for another minute or so. But yeah, I want to thank everybody, Matt, Mike, and Ruben. Thank you guys. It's been great. It was fun organizing and working with you on this. And once more, you'll get the recording, and also there are 2 blog posts that we'll include in that recording, which is a link to Hatch's TCPA checklist that should have you covered for 2025, and then the FCC FAQ. So, anybody have any final remarks before we sign off?
No, this was fun. Thank you for hosting, and excited to work with everyone through this year.
Yeah, same here. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Yep.
Thank you, Kristen.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
See you later, guys. Thanks, Kristen. Bye.
Thank you.